Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of That She May Find Peace. I'm Lindsay Jenkins, your host, and I'm excited to be with you today. So we are going to talk today about Mental Health 101, Coping with Anxiety and Depression. So this is something that I have dealt with my entire life. Let me caveat all of this by saying that I am not a therapist and I am not a doctor. So I am strictly sharing with you my own experiences and things that I have learned that have helped me over the last, almost 30 years that I have struggled with this depression. And I want you to understand that what I'm giving you here is help and suggestions, but ultimately the work is going to be yours to do. If you want to improve your life, it has to be you that makes that decision. Nobody else can make that decision for you. And there is going to be a lot of hard work involved, but I'm here to help you. I'm here to carry that load with you. I feel like that's something that we should all do for each other. But I feel especially called to do this mental health carrying with you. So what we're going to talk about today is just the symptoms and treatments of depression and anxiety. We're going to talk about the difference between major depressive disorder, which is referred to as MDD, and postpartum depression, which is referred to as PPD. Those are the two that I have experienced the most in my life. There are many other forms of depression, but those are the two that we're going to discuss today. We're also going to talk about GAD, or Generalized Anxiety Disorder. That's the most common anxiety disorder that people face. But again, there are varying levels of intensity for that as well. And we're going to talk about the symptoms and the treatments for that. And I'm just going to give you a few helps. So we'll start with depression. I know this seems like kind of not a great topic. I don't know, not necessarily a great topic. I don't know. But it does seem kind of like, to sound kind of funny, a depressing topic. And I don't want it to be that way because I feel like in some ways I have learned so much from my depression that I feel great about now. I didn't at the time, but I feel like I understand myself so much better, and it's helped me to understand my own children better, their own depression and anxiety struggles, and it's helped me to help others in my life, friends, the young women that I work with, as I mentioned in last week's episode. So I just feel like it's important to know that even though we're talking about depression, it's not necessarily a depressing subject to talk about. It actually can be therapeutic, joyful, peaceful, and even funny in some ways, I'm not sure how much funny I'll get into here, but let's just go ahead and get going. So the first I want to talk to you about is MDD, which is major depressive disorder. And I just want to share a few feelings or a few symptoms that come with major depressive disorder. For those of you who might not know what it's like personally, you might not have developed it yourself, but you have someone in your family who has it, and you are here to learn more, to help them. I think that's wonderful, first of all, and I'm so grateful that they have you as a support system. So just a few symptoms that I want to talk about. There's actually quite a lot. And when you go in to be diagnosed by a doctor, they'll give you a questionnaire that you'll have to fill out that kind of gives them an idea of where you're at. And then they continue to have you fill out these questionnaires as you go in for follow-up visits so they can gauge if you are improving or not. This isn't an end-all be-all thing. It's not going to, just these few questions and answers isn't going to magically determine, that you have depression. I mean, it has to kind of come from therapy and from years of experience, and it can be treated that way as well. But this kind of serves as a starting point with your doctor. So your first starting point, if you think you have MDD, is to go to your doctor, a family doctor, and then they can guide you in the direction that you need to go from that point. but just a few symptoms. So if you have persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, even when others might look at your life as being wonderful, even if you can logically look at your life and think, gosh, my life is wonderful, why in the world am I so sad all the time? I don't understand it. This could be a first early sign of major depressive disorder. Sometimes you have angry outbursts or feelings of frustration over the littlest things. A lot of times, this will happen to me and it drives me crazy, but Mike's like, are you about to start your period? And I'm like, that's not, always the answer, always the reason that I'm feeling this way, but it sometimes can be that case. But if you're not about to start your period and you're feeling this angry outburst or these feelings of frustration over super little things, it might actually be, again, the start of major depressive disorder. Constantly feeling tired and finding it difficult to get out of bed or do small things. This happens all the time, and your body aches because you just feel so tired. Either that or you feel like you're always awake. That can also be it's like very varying feelings of lack of sleep or too much sleep. Irrational anger at yourself or others. That kind of goes along with the PMS question that Mike loves to ask me, but it is an angry outburst that you wouldn't normally do for yourself. Especially having it towards yourself. Trouble concentrating. So I actually went to my own doctor. Usually I go to the doctor for my daughters lately, but I went for myself, and I was explaining to him how I felt like I might have ADHD. And I actually have a cousin who was diagnosed with depression from the beginning, and no depression medications helped her, and she found out later that she actually had ADHD. And a lot of times it can show up in women. Depression and ADHD can have very similar symptoms that can show themselves differently in women. And so this is usually diagnosed by more than a family doctor, somebody who specializes in the psychiatry of everything. But I went to my doctor saying that I couldn't concentrate. I was struggling at work. I would listen to people, but then my mind would just wander. And he listened to my story. He listened to what I've been dealing with my daughters. And he goes, you're already taking depression medication. Maybe we just need to up it a bit, because I was on the very, very lowest dose. And throughout my life, I've actually gone up and down on my dosages. And I was like, okay, let's give that a shot, because he didn't feel like it was ADHD in my situation, listening to what was going on in my life. He felt like I had been shoved into a much more difficult situation, and my depression was coming out, not necessarily in, feelings of worthlessness or feelings of suicide, but in just feeling like I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't listen the way that I should, and it was affecting my work. And since he increased my dosage, it's actually helped quite a lot. So a lot of times the depression medication that you may get from your doctor can also help with ADHD symptoms. Feeling worthless and fixating on your mistakes. This is a big one. Everybody feels worthless every once in a while. Everybody has moments where they're like, oh, shoot, I made a really bad mistake here. That was dumb. But when you have depression, you focus on those mistakes. You keep thinking about them over and over and over. And it's just like, it's all you think about. So that is one symptom as well. Sometimes you think about death. And I feel like this needs to be a trigger warning. I should have probably announced this at the beginning, but for those of you who have gone through these feelings, I personally have as well. It's a scary thing to be at a point in your life where you are ready to just end it all. And it's a very difficult thing. And if this happens often, if you're thinking about it often, or wishing that you could just end everything often, this is a huge red flag. And you need to get help. Changes in your eating habits or appetite. Either you put on weight because you just can't stop eating, or you take off a lot of weight. Memory difficulty, not taking an interest in things that you used to love. Like you used to love walking, taking walks with your friends through the neighborhood, and now you never want to do that. But you loved it before. You're like, why? My daughter was just saying the other day that she loves to go shopping, but she went into one shop and she just kind of walks in and she's like, ugh, I don't even want to be here. And then she walked into another shop and was like, ugh, I don't want to be here. And she just realized that at that moment she was kind of in a low and she needed to go home and just kind of reset and take a few days. And we'll discuss how to come out of a low in future episodes. Okay, so those are just a few symptoms of major depressive disorder, MDD. Now, PPD, postpartum depression, is different but the same. So the difference in PPD is that basically the diagnosis comes after a baby is born. And it's important to note that it's not always immediately after a baby is born. In fact, you can be diagnosed with PPD up to 2 years after your baby is born. And really, that's the only difference between major depressive disorder and PPD, is that major depressive disorder can happen at any point in your life, whereas PPD happens after you had a baby. Usually within a few weeks. The window is usually a few weeks to a few years. A lot of people can joke, could I possibly have PPD when my kids are teenagers? And honestly, I've probably found myself making that joke too. But no, at that point, I think if you are struggling with these symptoms, you'd probably have depression. For me, I was diagnosed with depression when I was a teenager. And it was amplified big time when I had my babies. And actually all 4 of them, they were amplified. But my first was the worst, and my feelings of depression were the worst with my first. The second, third, and fourth, I was able to control those better because I understood what was going on. But for PPD, a couple of extra things that you may find is that you're not taking an interest in your child. And you feel guilty because of that. You're like, I should be so excited. I have this new baby. I should be loving this child, and I feel nothing. And you cannot get mad at yourself for that. That is not your problem. It's not your fault that you are not feeling connected to your child. It is because there's an imbalance there. It is a disease. And you may feel frustrated towards your child. They keep crying. They won't sleep. I don't feel, I found myself, I couldn't nurse. I actually couldn't nurse. And so I was like, is there something wrong with me? I'm not producing enough milk. I can't, be the kind of mom that I'm supposed to be. I have to feed her with formula. And I just felt like I was just this failure. And it just kept getting amplified. I would cry all the time. This is another symptom. Irrational fears. I would fear that she was going to be kidnapped. I would even fear leaving her with my husband or my dad or my brother. I was always fearful of leaving her with men. I don't know why. It was irrational. And thoughts of hurting yourself or your child. This is the part that a lot of moms don't want to admit to, because we feel like, oh my gosh, what kind of a monster am I that I could even imagine hurting my child. But I can remember I was walking to work one day. I worked about a mile away, and I would push Audrey in her stroller, and we would walk over this bridge to get to the work. And I remember thinking to myself, looking over the bridge, and I'm just like, I could just throw Audrey over the bridge. But then, my mind would come back and I'd be like, but then I'd have to jump out over her and try and save her, but it was just like these thoughts of hurting her would come, and it scared me because I was like, what kind of a monster am I? I wasn't a monster. I had a chemical imbalance. I already had it from the time I was young, and then it was amplified because of all the hormones that were just raging in my body from having just given birth. She was only a few months old at this time. You're not able to think clearly And this isn't all the time. Like I said, when I was on that bridge, it was very just, oh, I felt like I was in a haze, like I could just throw her over the bridge. And, but then I snapped back to reality and I'm like, oh, I'm thinking clearly. But, we joke is, we've got mom brain or whatever when our babies are born. And just because you can't think clearly doesn't mean that you have PPD, but it can be one of the symptoms of PPD. And then you have panic attacks. Now, again, this is a normal thing for new moms to have panic attacks. We don't know what we're doing. What if we're totally messing up our baby? We have no idea. None of us do things the same. We all do things differently. And that's another thing that's super important for us as moms to realize, that we cannot compare ourselves to other moms. We have to do what is right for us and for our child. But you might have a panic attack because you feel like you're messing up your kid. That's not the case. So the difference, again, between the two, there's not a lot of difference, except that one is diagnosed after giving birth and there are some symptoms that are involved with your child. But honestly, with major depressive disorder, I have found, again, even as my kids were older, I would feel frustration, I would feel anger with them, irrational anger. Not that I would want to hurt them necessarily, but they would cause me, quote unquote, to feel even worse. And I felt like I was a terrible mother because I wasn't being patient with them. So it doesn't necessarily matter. It's just when you're diagnosed with it and what brings it on. Another thing that you have to remember is that depression can come from a few different sources. It could be genetic. In my case, it is genetic. My dad has depression. It can also happen because of a traumatic life experience, or it can happen just as, a general buildup of stress in life and feeling depressed. But in that case, usually it's situational depression and it will go away. But as I mentioned before, major depressive disorder or persistent depression comes from even when you can see that things in your life are good and there's nothing to complain about, you still feel depressed. So, treatments. Okay, treatments. First and foremost, medication. This isn't always going to be for everyone. Again, like being a mom, we have to decide what is best for us, but at least explore the option of medication. Go talk to your doctor. Go talk to an educated medical person about medication. Do research on the side effects. Do research, get second opinions. Some people are highly against medication, and that is their prerogative. But you need to at least explore that option. Another huge, huge help is therapy. Therapy from a licensed therapist or psychiatrist is also hand in hand with medication. It's helpful. You have to understand, though, that depression isn't going to just go away unless it's like a situational thing. But major depressive disorder is probably going to be with you forever. It's like having diabetes, or it's like having cancer. Cancer, you can go into remission. It's still in your body, but you might not be feeling the effects of it for years and years. That's the way depression can be as well. I've had times in my life where my depression hasn't affected me and I haven't had to be on medication. I've actually been in a really good place. But that's not always the case. It can fluctuate, it can come and go. But non-medical treatments, journaling, self-care, being outside, exercise, eating healthy. I have found that sugar actually makes my depression worse. And my dad has found that out for himself as well. I feel like journaling and sketching has been huge for me, and so because of that, I'm developing products that I want to be able to share with others that will help them find that same therapy. Talking with someone, even just venting, not necessarily finding a solution to your problem, but just venting and knowing that other people feel what you're feeling. That has been huge. Okay, so that's about all I have with depression. So then we have anxiety. A lot of times anxiety and depression will go hand in hand. You can have one without the other, totally possible, but usually they do go hand in hand. And anxiety is a little more difficult to control because it's not always treatable with medication. It's usually caused by stress or life events and feeling like you don't quite know how to handle. And it just kind of snowballs and becomes bigger and bigger. And then you have to learn life skills to cope with the anxiety. But in general, anxiety is called Generalized Anxiety Disorder. And a few symptoms of that are constant worry that is unrealistic or out of proportion to the situation. That's important to remember because like I said, everybody, regardless of whether or not they have been diagnosed with anxiety, can feel anxious about certain situations. Everyone feels nervous before they go give a speech, or they go for a driver's test, or, they do something big for the first time. You're always going to feel kind of nervous, and there's a difference between feeling nervous and having anxiety, or being anxious and having anxiety. There's a difference because everyone can be anxious about something, but not everyone is going to constantly be anxious about everything. Another symptom is that you have an inability to talk to others or do normal things. One of my daughters has been diagnosed with GAD, and it was to a point where we were at a restaurant once and the waiter asked her what her order was. And she had been ordering her own food from the time she was very young. But for some reason this night and going forward, she was unable to give him her order. And she actually sat there just paralyzed with fear and then started to cry. And we all kind of looked at her like, what the heck's going on, And she just couldn't do it. And then like a few days later, we were at Costco and I asked her to go up to the counter and get a drink for me, and she started to cry. She couldn't. She could not talk to the person at the counter. And this was an inability to do stuff that she had normally done. This led to a lot of events that she struggled with, and irrational fears. Sometimes, people with anxiety will look at normal situations. We're just driving down the street and they start thinking, oh my gosh, we could like skid off the street and run into a pole, and not only will we be killed, but the pole will knock down into someone's home, and it'll start their house on fire, and then everyone will be out of electricity, and all this stuff. They just start snowballing this huge situation into something that is completely crazy, completely a catastrophe. They call it catastrophizing. And it's just a crazy, irrational fear. You have trouble concentrating. You're tired, constantly tired. And you have muscle tension and soreness. Those are just a few symptoms. Treatments. So number one is not necessarily medication, actually. Number one is therapy from a licensed therapist or a psychiatrist. Also support groups through a therapist or through a psychiatrist. Support groups are great because you feel like you have people that can relate to your specific anxiousness. And then those medical workers, those therapists or psychiatrists, can tell you if medication can help your specific situation. You can also go to your family doctor, but in the past I have found that our family doctor usually says, some medications for depression do help with anxiety, but mostly anxiety needs to be dealt with a professional therapist, and they need to give you tools to work through your fears. You have to figure out plans of action for potential situations that might scare you. For example, if you're driving and all of a sudden it starts snowing and you get really worried that your car is going to slip and slide on the road and you're going to get into an accident, figure out your plan of action. What are you going to do if this happens? Well, I'm going to turn my wheel in the direction that I'm going, and I'm going to just pull over to the side of the road. And then once you have that action, that plan in mind, then you can feel a little bit better. Okay, I think I can handle this, Or if you're at the restaurant, okay, I don't really want to order, but I know that I can point to what I want at the menu, and I think that would be good enough, and or I won't look at the server, but I'll tell them what I want, and someone can help me if that's needed, So you figure out a plan of action for whatever your potential situation is. There's also grounding. It's kind of a breathing exercise, and it's where you look around and you notice 5 things, and then you notice 4 smells, and then you notice 3 things that you can touch, and you just have to align yourself with your surroundings and get yourself to a point where, okay, I can see that I'm safe. I can see my lotion over here, and I can smell it, and I know that it smells great, and I can feel the Kleenex, it's soft, and I can feel this pen in my hand. Like you have yourself in the moment. Another treatment is exercising outdoors if possible. Yoga, breathing techniques helps amazingly. Changing your diet. Good changes, hopefully. Meditation, journaling or sketching, and surrounding yourself with supportive people and activities. People who don't try to help you with your anxiety or tease you about it. Probably not people you want to hang out with. And what causes it? Again, like I said, brain imbalances, that's a huge one. You have to remember that these are diseases. Like I said, they're like cancer or they're like diabetes or something. They are a medical issue. You have to see a doctor. You have to get on medication, just like you would for any other disease. So don't try and think to yourself, well, I just have to, I'm being a whiner. No, you're not. You have to be able to deal with these things. You have to consider them a disease. Another thing that I want to point out for me, because I'm gearing myself toward Christian women or toward people who have a belief in a higher power, is channeling your treatments with that higher power. For me, my higher power, like I have said, is God, and prayer has gotten me through innumerable situations. There have been many times where I have felt completely hopeless, and I actually talk about one in my blog that I will link here in the comments or in the description of this podcast episode, but I talk about one where I almost took my own life when I was a teenager, but something stopped me. Somebody told me that I had something ahead of me that I didn't want to miss out on, and they were right. Shortly after that, I met Mike. And I don't to this day know who it was that spoke to me because I was alone in my home. But it was an amazing miracle for me. And I do believe that God sends messengers to help us through these times. And I believe strongly in the power of prayer and in the power of centering yourself on a higher power, whether that be the universe or whether it be whatever kinds of belief that you have, a higher power beyond just ourselves, a spiritual power. That is huge. So I want to address one more thing that kind of stems. It's the starting point for everything involving depression and anxiety is how you speak to yourself. I want you to ask yourself, when you look in the mirror, what do you see and what do you say to yourself? I've actually done this lesson before with my young women, with the teenage girls that I work with. And I asked them to pass in slips of paper. And I'm actually going to be talking about this in our challenge starting on Thursday. So I hope that you guys will be able to sign up for that challenge. So I won't go into huge amounts of detail here because I'm going to go over that in the challenge. But the answers were, they just broke my heart, because I looked at these girls and I saw so many beautiful, wonderful people that I loved with all of my heart. And it made me wonder why they couldn't see themselves the way that I saw them. But then it made me wonder, how many people think that about me? How many people look at me and think how beautiful and wonderful I am, and yet I couldn't see that about myself? So I'm asking you, how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself the way that someone who loves you would see you? Do you speak to yourself compassionately? Do you speak to yourself the way that you might speak to your child, or your best friend, or your sister, or your brother, or your mom? Do you speak to yourself gently and kindly? I want you to work on that this week. That is your call to action, is to have compassion on yourself. To know that this is a disease. If you have MDD, PPD, or GAD, if you have any of these, they are a medical condition. There are ways for you to control them, but you have to give yourself grace. You have to give yourself compassion. You have to give yourself love. So I want you to work on that this week. And I'm going to talk about what I want you to do on Instagram. I'm actually going to post a video of exactly what I want you to do. I will post that probably Tuesday. So, but I want you to stand in a mirror, and I'll just explain it here, but I'll show you what I mean on Instagram. But I want you to trace your body. I want you to trace yourself. And if you can't do this yourself, ask someone to help you. But I want you to use a dry erase marker, and I want you to trace yourself on the mirror. And then every day when you go to that mirror, I want you to write on some body part something that you love about yourself. For me, it would be, I love my eyes. They're beautiful and I can see the good in other people. Or I love my hands because they have held my children. And I love my mom belly. We call it our mom apron. But that lovely flap of skin that hangs down after you've born children, because it's been stretched and shrunk and stretched and shrunk so many times. And we all look at it and we think, ugh, those stretch marks are not great. But you had a kid in there. You are beautiful. And that child came from there. So I want you to draw little hearts in the mirror on those parts that you don't love. And say out loud why you love them. I'll show you on Tuesday. I want you to speak to yourself compassionately. The quote for today comes from the Dalai Lama, and he says, "Compassion is not religious business. It is human business. It is not luxury. It is essential for our own peace and mental stability. It is essential for human survival." We as people tend to look at others with compassion. We look at someone who is suffering. So compassion means to suffer together. This is literally what it means. It is the feeling that arises when you see someone else suffering and you want to relieve that suffering. So my question to you is, how does that apply to yourself when you're going through a bout of depression or anxiety? Should we speak to ourselves as if we are a failure for feeling depressed, or should we congratulate ourselves for being strong? I believe that we should help ourselves relieve the struggle, relieve the suffering, and be gentle. I discussed this more in my starter kit, so another call to action that I have for you is to go to my website, happiermomlife.com, and find the starter kit. It's on all of my blog posts. Again, I will link it in the body of the podcast. I want you to download the starter kit. It's completely free. And it has so much information, really good stuff in there. And I want you to download it and I want you to look through it, familiarize yourself with it. And I also want you to sign up for Just Do the Dang Thing, starting on Thursday, the 11th, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at noon Mountain Standard Time. During my lunch, during hopefully you guys' lunch, bring your lunch with you, join me on Zoom. We're going to have this live presentation. It's going to be amazing, and I'm going to go over so much stuff. We're going to go over so much leadership knowledge, things that I've learned from conferences, and things that I want to share with you. Not only that you can use to help yourself, but also to help those in your life who might suffer from depression or anxiety as well. So those are your calls to action. I want you to start speaking to yourself compassionately this week. I want you to speak to yourself as you would someone that you love, because I want you to love yourself. I want you to know how powerful you are and how amazing you are. And then I want you to sign up for Just Do the Dang Thing, and I want you to get the starter kit. Okay, they're all linked in the body of my podcast. I'm so excited that you guys are here. Please share this podcast with your friends. Share the website with your friends. The more people we have in our tribe, the better off we are, the happier we will be. I love you. I love you so much, and I want to be here for you. And I know that God loves you too. And I'm here to help you understand, again, just how powerful you are. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you next week.